This week, we welcome Harold Rivas, Chief Information Security Officer at Trellix, to do a little CISO soul searching, navigating the evolving role of the CISO. In the leadership and communications section, the strategic implications of cybersecurity, a C-level perspective, leadership misconceptions that hinder your success, mastering communication, lessons from 2 years of learning, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Let's talk about something that's becoming increasingly important for enterprise companies worldwide: cyber risk management. Traditionally, cyber risk has been managed manually in silos, separate from the business's core operations. The future is about getting real-time risk insights benchmarked against your industry peers through automation. And CyberSaint's CyberStrong platform is leading the charge. CyberStrong is not just another point solution. It's a revolutionary platform. It's a quantified top-down risk approach where your unique cyber risks inform C-suite decision-making to identify your top 5 cyber risks and the controls to mitigate them. Sign up for your free cyber risk analysis by visiting securityweekly.com/cybersaint. High-value employees have become the path of least resistance and a key source of compromise for corporations. Attacks against executives can compromise their personal accounts, enable corporate breaches, and can even compromise their reputation, wealth, and physical security. Black Cloak understands that an executive's personal digital footprint is crucial to enterprise security. We provide concierge cybersecurity solutions tailored for executives, safeguarding their personal data, devices, and online presence. Experience peace of mind knowing that your team is protected with Black Cloak Digital Executive Protection. Secure your digital life with blackcloak.io. Visit us now at securityweekly.com/blackcloak. Enterprises today are using hundreds of SaaS applications. Are you reaping their productivity and innovation benefits, or are you lost in the sprawl? Enter Savvy Security. They help you surface every SaaS app, identity, and risk so you can shine a light on shadow IT and risky identities. Savvy monitors your entire SaaS attack surface to help you efficiently eliminate toxic risk combinations and prevent attacks. So go on, get savvy about SaaS and harness the productivity benefits. Fuel innovation while closing security gaps. Visit securityweekly.com/savvy to learn more. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 344, recorded April 1st, 2024. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Happy Easter, happy Passover for those. Joining me remotely are my co-hosts for today's segment. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. What's up, Jason?
What's happening, Matt? How are you? I'm unfortunately, I dropped down to 18th place. I was holding the number 1 slot in my bracket for March Madness all the way through until this weekend. And I dropped all the way down to 18.
Some interesting upsets this weekend. Let's just
big
put
time.
It that way.
I still have UConn taking it all though.
I think it's UConn and Purdue. I think probably the 2 best teams in the country. My guess is, but North Carolina State, dude, like they started with Texas Tech and have pretty much upset everybody all the way through. It's crazy.
They're scary.
Yeah, they're scary. Yeah. Also joining me for this segment, Mr. Ben Carr. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Matt. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
Beautiful weather in Texas this week. Last week, too.
Yeah, it was a good weekend. A little overcast today, but good weekend. Warming up here.
Yeah, getting warm. Hold on, folks. In a couple months, we'll be so darn hot, we won't be able to stand it. All right, couple announcements before we begin. Google has announced that they will be shutting down the Google Podcast platform in mid-2024 to ensure that you don't lose all your great Security Weekly content that you love and know. Please make sure that you subscribe to your favorite podcast feeds on alternate platforms such as Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Podcast Addict, Podcast or Pocket Cast, or anywhere else you listen to the podcast. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to find the buttons to subscribe to the shows now. On the evening of Monday, May 6, 2024, W2 Communications and Cyber Risk Alliance are bringing Cyber Tacos back to San Francisco. If eating free tacos, sipping on margaritas, and mingling with cyber professionals from all over the world sounds good to you, make sure to register to secure your spot. Visit securityweekly.com/cyber tacos to RSVP today. As CISO, Harold leads Trellix's global security and compliance initiatives, enabling the company to best protect against threats, manage compliance needs and third-party risks, and implement industry-wide best practices. Harold brings more than 2 decades of cybersecurity experience to Trellix. Prior to joining Trellix, he was CISO at Loan Depot and held previous CISO roles at multiple companies, including Santander Consumer and Fujitsu America. He has also led global cybersecurity programs at Citigroup. Harold, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
It's great to be here, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're going to do a little CISO soul searching today. As we were getting ready for this, any CISO who wants to come on the show and talk best practices, share stories, they're all welcome. And as we were figuring out the segment, what I thought was interesting is we talk about this a lot on the show, and we've seen this kind of transformation of the CISO role. And we'll cover some of those. But one of the things that I kind of think about on a day-to-day basis, is it worth being a CISO in today's climate?
Yeah. It's a great question, Matt. So I think a lot of us are going through a bit of soul searching, right? We've seen the role changing so much, so dramatically, and that's part of what makes it really exciting. The story's still not written. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like in the future. But for me, I have found this incredibly rewarding as the role has evolved over the past 2 decades. And many of those years I've sat in this seat, and seen how attitudes have changed, how organizations first barely knew what this thing was, and then eventually came to say, it's really important we have you here. Don't know what you do, but I know it's important we have you here. So for me, it absolutely is one of these things where it depends on what your goals are, right? If this is a role that speaks to you, it's stress, it's rewards, it's ability to affect an organization, or something that resonates with you, then absolutely gear up, get in, go for it. But it can be a tough ride for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just so many new pressures on the CISO role than there ever have been, right? I mean, back in the day, it was more of a simple role. It was part of IT. It was dealing with security. You're talking, 20 years ago. Now we're talking about, thousands and thousands of sources of information flying at us at 1,000 miles an hour. We're talking about regulatory and legal landscape that is changing on the daily, right? I mean,
Yep.
the attack surface is so wide and broad today. The pressures are more than they have ever been. So,
Mhm.
so talk to me a little bit about how you can have a conversation with, let's say, a young up and coming CISO who sits
Yeah.
back and says, "I don't know if I can handle these kind of pressures." What would you say to them?
It's a great question, Jason. So what I would suggest is, first and foremost, there is a set of behaviors or personality traits that I think are natural towards anyone who really sort of has some staying power in this role. A high interest and curiosity, right? A willingness to sort of always be interested in trying to solve a new problem, trying to get at the root of issues and figuring out ways. For me, one of the most rewarding things is the ability to see your impact in an organization, right? Objectively looking at an organization when you walk in and saying, okay, look, I know what I've done. I know what I've done in this organization has had a demonstrable effect. I would say if you have a deep technical interest, if you have a desire to affect organizations in big ways, the stress is there, right? It certainly is a factor, but don't let that dissuade you, because I think that this role is in many ways what the chief legal officer or the general counsel of an organization may have been decades upon decades ago, where we know we need to have you. You bring a lot to the table. I need a lawyer, or I need someone who has this knowledge, who can navigate these really difficult places, because there are risks of lawsuits or risks of data breaches. And then eventually you kind of settle into the role. And the intolerable risks, the things, no one hires a chief legal officer today and says, I'll never be sued, right? I'll never be, I'll never go through a significant lawsuit because I have this person. No, that's an evolution. And I think we're going through an evolution that will eventually make this a bit more manageable for us, kind of early days, writing the story of what this role will be in corporations.
So
I'm gonna pull. Can I pull a little bit of a Matt and say I want to double click on something that you just said?
Sure, let's go into it.
Let's double because you said if you have a deep desire for technical, right,
Yeah.
the technical side of the aisle. We talk about this on this show all the time. How important is that technical expertise versus being someone who knows the business and
Yeah.
can navigate the
So-
business and
Yeah.
has that
So-
business acumen versus the technical acumen?
Another great question, Jason. So I think that historically, and I think it has served me, I went down the infrastructure, sysadmin. I wanted to be a CCIE. I wanted the bomber jacket in my early days in my career. And has served me well to understand technology at that level, right? Where regardless of what might be going on, I still, I've certainly have had to let go of some of the deep technical knowledge. Please, for anyone, if I were to provide any guidance or recommendations, don't define yourself as the technical SME. Bring that as a skill, okay? But the language you must speak around the boardroom with executives is the language of business, not the language of technology, which you should be a master of as well. So I think it's incredibly important, and I think it can be a struggle for someone who has come to the world from a controls background, or perhaps strictly from a business and audit background. If you're not well versed and you're having those deep conversations, certainly you'll have people within your organization. You should staff up if you're not necessarily very comfortable with the technical details. But please, make the investment up front early in your career. It'll serve you for decades to come.
So I want to jump in and play a bit of a contrarian, right? As I guess I usually do on the show sometimes.
Right.
When Matt asked you the question initially and you kind of responded to it, you said that things have changed greatly, and I would counter and say things have changed greatly, but utterly stayed the same, right? Like when we talk to the board, when we talk to other C-level execs, it's still a lot of move aside, we're doing real people's work here, right? We're doing business. Like, you're a tech guy, get over in the corner, get back in the server closet, shut the door. Like, let us know when things are working again. And I think that's done a disservice, right? I think you maybe hinted a little bit at it. And you and Jason kind of double down on this a little bit. And I want to delve into that, right? Because I like to pick at why things aren't changing, right? Like, why we see, when I look at the things that are happening in the market today around breaches and attacks and threat actors that we have, it's a lot of the same, right? Like, we see things like Colonial, we see things like Change Healthcare, and we think, well, why hasn't that moved the bubble? So I'm interested from your perspective, especially CISO for Trellix, like, why are we still doing this? Like, why hasn't it taken more of a forefront, right? Top 1, 2, 3 risks is cyber at most organizations. So just counterpoint. Yep. What do you think?
Thanks for that question, Ben. So I do believe that as the story of the CISO is still being written, right? And more of them are having the opportunity to have the conversation. That doesn't mean they've been equipped, they're prepared, they know what to say, they have the right, set of background and experiences to be successful when they get board level visibility. I think that's part of the struggle. I had a good conversation with a CISO buddy of mine. We were talking about this idea of so many CISOs complain about not having a seat at the table. And then when they get the seat at the table, they have no idea what they're going to say. And it's a true struggle. I know it is a struggle because nothing you did so far prepared you to have a conversation with a 40-year veteran in banking and have a relevant, useful conversation to them. If all you can bring to the table is, IDS signatures and this vulnerability, no one really cares, right? Like, at those levels, you have to find a way to make
to that point. I mean, the first time I was a CISO, I knew that I had to have a relationship with other C-level execs, right? But having the conversation with the CFO, it's like, what do we talk about? Like, what do we have shared dialogue on that there's interest to then extend the conversation and develop that relationship where it's important? So I think that's an interesting point, right? Combined with the fact, like, a lot of what you're talking about is what the CISO brings to the table. But there's something that I think the rest of the org, especially the CEO and the board, have to bring, which is support, right?
Right.
Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So you cannot do this job alone. And the most successful CISOs, I think, are going out there and making this a business problem, recognizing that this is not a technology investment strictly, or a set of policies or regulatory, although those are important opportunities to connect and create a bit of a common understanding for other executives in an organization. Right. For example, within Trellix, the executive order 1428, Biden administration issued an executive order that affects our industry and many others for anyone who's providing services back to the federal government. That was something that I had to pick up the mantle and say, okay, this is important. This is a conversation we need to have with executives across the entire organization, not only sales, but across everywhere. It is critically important. I think, CEOs, CFOs, and other partners in the executive suite should make it their business to try and connect with CISOs. CISOs are carrying a risk, aware, and creating a campaign of awareness. So I've gone through in previous organizations an opportunity to sit down in a simulated crisis scenario, and it was incredibly valuable to create the right kind of dialogue, because what it did was it helped general counsel, the CFO, and others understand their part in managing this kind of risk. Absent that, oftentimes they don't really see themselves as having really any skin in the game. So I think it's essential, absolutely essential, to have the right kinds of conversations to create the kind of awareness, whether it's regulatory, whether it's something that happened to another organization in your industry, that allows to have that much broader understanding of the risks and therefore the right kind of engagement.
And Harold, do you think that the accountability or responsibility lies upon the CISO to go build those bridges? Because I don't know. I mean, out there in the business, you think of I don't know, an HR leader. I don't see them innately saying, "Oh, I need to go speak to a CISO because he's going to help me move the needle for my business unit," right? So at the end of it, I feel that it's the responsibility for the CISO to go to evangelize the team, evangelize what they bring to the table, how they're going to help move the needle for your business unit. Because let's face it, these leaders are accountable to the CEO, and they're going to say, what's in it for me? By having this conversation, by taking time out of my day when I could be moving my business unit forward, what's in it for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is drawing those parallels that we talked about earlier, the legal profession. Just think about it, right? Who's going out of their way to go reach out to legal to have a conversation about how the chief legal officer is going to support them,
Right.
assist them, add value to their organization? If they're not out there creating the right kind of conversation, saying, I am asserting a seat at the table, I bring very specialized knowledge and I bring value to this organization, I'm going to proactively reach out and evangelize my mission and my charter. I think that is a kind of emboldened, self-preservation. You need to be doing this. If you're not doing this, if you're not evangelizing for your function, you're going to end up, as Ben mentioned earlier, bring in your report. Okay, great. Go back to your server closet.
Yeah, and I think, Harold, there is a part of this that you need support from the CEO, the
Mhm.
board, the
Mhm.
executive team, right? Because I agree with you. Look, you need to be the evangelist, but you also need support from your top line executive team to go out and build these conversations. And I guess my question is, how many organizations, or are organizations, really serious about the CISO role? Because when we look at the stats and we look at the numbers out there, it doesn't look very positive that companies want a CISO role.
Mhm. So I'm perhaps colored by my own experience in financial services. So before Trellix, I spent quite a bit of time, the vast majority of my experience in financial services. And in that industry, I have regulators up and down the chain at the state level, at the federal level, who are saying, do you know who your CISO is? Are you talking to them regularly? Do you have a clear accounting of the risks? Do you understand this is your role and your responsibility, not the CISOs? So it has been a net benefit and gain to have a regulatory body presuming some understanding and forcing that within the organization, which is creating the right kind of dialogue. But then again, That in and of itself is not enough, right? It's not just being allowed to have a seat at the table. You actually need to have something impactful to say,
But
right?
but that's also interesting because that's industry specific, right? So I've seen that as well, right? And I've walked into organizations that were highly regulated, and you peel back the onion, and yeah, you're regulated in the gaming industry, but you don't have SOX, you don't have HIPAA, you don't have GLBA, you don't have FISMA, you don't have you don't have PCI even, and so like you go back to regulations that affect cyber, and it's not there. I like the onion you're peeling back around, um, you know, like kind of asserting a seat at the table. Mark Schwartz, Seat at the Table, the book. Like there's this interesting dialogue he has in that book where he actually talks about, like, in the IT side, we've often come as servant leaders, and I know, Jason, you talk about this, right? Being a servant leader, and I think there's value to that, but at the same time, it almost does a disservice, right? Because if you're always coming asking, like, can I get you another glass of water? Like, you're always going to perceive as the guy bringing the water, right? You're never going to be seen as the people who are sitting at the table actually having the discussion, right? You're just helping out, right? And so,
I'll get into a debate about that with you, Ben.
no, we
because
can have, and that's good. I like the debate, right?
being a
But I
servant
think
leader,
there is
being a servant leader is, how can I help you become a better leader in this organization? How can I enable you?
sure, but misperceived, right? I think misperceived by a lot of people in IT
Sure.
and tech, and that's where I want to get to, right? Is that, do you agree? Like, is there this section of, like, we've set ourselves up for a little bit of failure because, to Jason's point, we've interpreted that wrong, right? You can still do servant leadership, you can still be a servant to the business, you can still be helpful to everybody else, but you can't just wait for stuff to happen. Like, you have to kind of take the reins and you have to run with it, right? Like, I think that's what you're getting at, right?
I agree completely, Ben. I think I've been in organizations where I've understood the prevailing culture, the attitudes. You kind of, especially freshly walking into an organization, you can kind of get a sense of the lay of the land. And oftentimes, technology organizations in particular are, once again, it's a cost center. It's a necessary thing, and the struggle as a CISO, wanting to establish a brand and an identity for the program, one that creates the right kind of win-win scenarios with your business unit, that creates the right kind of engagement. You almost need to depart from that general view of what I believe about IT and start to write a completely new story and brand for information security, which in and of itself I know is an ongoing challenge, right? I have had CISO colleagues report in, I've reported into risk and technology. I have some that report into legal, right? So many organizations still don't quite know what to do with CISOs, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is a whole, conversation.
And we've had that debate a lot here, right? Like, reporting
Yeah.
structure is a big issue.
But I do believe it is essential for CISOs out there to set up their own brand and say, who do I want to be known for? What do I want to have understood about what we bring to the table, independent of how do I best serve the needs of the business? Because oftentimes, and I've had examples of this in my own career, the business wants to do something, and whether it's because I own a control function or because I own some other area, I'm directly in the path of being able to create a win-win for the organization where the business realizes a benefit and we also reduce risk at the same time. And I can get that business owner to say, hell, I feel really good about this because not only did I win for the business, but look at all this amazing stuff. And then we can kind of champion that and, do some positive press within the organization for it.
Right. But I think back to the financial industry, we've known they've been the most mature for the longest. My concern is we have some of the same kind of things coming down from the SEC for public companies, but I'm not seeing that same level of maturity and embracing of a CISO role yet. Now, maybe that changes, and I hope that changes soon. But I just look at the other industries and I'm like, if you're not getting support from the board and your CEO, can you even be successful as a CISO in some of these other organizations?
Matt, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a real struggle. Look, I've had the good benefit of getting to speak with CISOs around the world, customers of Trellix and others, and get an understanding not only of the regional realities, but across multiple verticals. And in the absence of some external pressure that says you really need to be taking this very seriously and you need to do something as an organization, I'm going to hold you accountable for it. It's a struggle. I've seen it in highly developed economies and in, markets that you would not believe, healthcare and others, where it's just sort of like, I know I need you there, but I don't really care,
Yeah.
right? And it's hard to try and advocate when there's no one listening, right? And to
Yeah.
try to
We,
create the right kind of value.
we talk about this a lot here, and all of us agree that we don't want overbearing regulation. Just as a citizen of the United States, right?
Yeah.
We don't want that pressure of regulation for everything. But what we struggle with is we don't really see any other avenue that's going to be the carrot or the stick for the
Mhm.
CEOs of the boards.
Yep.
That's what
Yep.
we're struggling through because they're not doing it on their own.
Yeah, and one of the big challenges is the quantification of risk, right? Because we're in the business of managing risk, and if you step back far enough, an organization that's better managing risk should outperform an organization that's not over time. You could argue J.P. Morgan Chase did an amazing job of managing the financial crisis risk and has been rewarded as a result, right? As an example, it's still new days and we're still really coming up with good solid ways of measuring cyber risk, operational risk as a component of operational risk. And I think that it will bear out, it will bear fruit over time that organizations that are much more savvy at managing this risk will survive, will live on, right? It becomes a survival of the fittest type of situation. But you really are talking about very forward leaning type of risk quantification conversations, which fortunately most C suites just don't have that kind of conversation. They're thinking about sales, quarter performance, right? And the realities on the ground. What's immediately in front.
Well, and that's why I think quantification is so important, because if we can't quantify it in the business terms they understand, which is dollars and cents, right? Whether it's revenue, whether it's cost, they have to understand how risks can bite into either one of those quickly. And I think that is the biggest challenge, I think, for cyber and the CISOs is, can we effectively quantify risks into those dollars and cents that the boards and the CEOs and the CFOs can make the right decisions, right? This is a decision at the end of the day. It's a risk management decision. And I think quantification is going to be a big role going forward to try to get people aligned on, look, I have this amount of risk. Should I do something about it or not? At least you're making a decision and you can document it, because that's what the SEC is going to ultimately enforce, I think, which is the disclosure around materiality. But I don't know how you do it without quantification.
Exactly. And honestly, I think that's a critical skill set development for CISOs everywhere. Certainly partner up with your CFO, right? Follow gap-like methods for trying to quantify in dollars and cents what the potential impacts are. But the board level conversation you as a CISO should be having are about operational availability, business resilience, right? Impact to revenue, protecting revenue, not necessarily the latest cyber threat actor and so forth, although those have the right time and place. That's the language of risk. And one other thing as a parallel, but an example of where I see this evolving, coming from financial services, there's oftentimes cyber risk and business risk are major components. And for the past several roles, more and more of my day to day started to take on dimensions of business risk, where I would believe, and I've seen this in some large financial institutions, CISOs taking on responsibility for fraud, because so much of it now traverses the internet, looks very much like a cyber incident investigation.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the fact that you said partner with the CFO. I've told the story on the show a lot of times as a young CISO, kind of getting my feet underneath, having a conversation with the CFO. You walk in the door and you start talking about risk, and you start speaking the language of like penetration test results, yellow, green, red, right? And the CFO looked at me and goes, all right, we're gonna fix this conversation. Let's talk about dollars and cents. And it was eye opening at that point for me.
Mhm.
And that's how we had risk conversations from then on in terms of dollars and cents to the company. Right?
Yeah.
How is it going to impact our clients' revenue? Right? Operational cost. Can we find operational efficiencies out of what you're doing? Going down that path. Are there opportunities for me to go have a conversation with the business unit about process improvement? This is a CISO talking about process improvement within the organization.
Mhm.
So it led me down those paths, and it was the best relationship I had. So I love the fact that you mentioned that. That's probably one of the best relationships within the business you should garden and sow and make sure it grows.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And many organizations, many CEOs are going to be leaning towards quarterly results, financial performance. I've used the term, we're not the business prevention department, right? So if there's a critical deal that needs to happen, especially in financial services, you don't want to create some traction and friction. Get to know your salespeople, get to know the head of those organizations, partner with marketing, partner with all these different areas where you understand the lay of the land, you understand the organization, what is the organization driving to achieve, and then figure out how to best create the right parallels, right? So that there is a benefit. But first and foremost, adopt their language, not your own, and hope that they come along for the
Exactly.
ride.
Right.
Nobody's coming to understand everything you're doing day in, day out.
Absolutely. Harold, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
It's been wonderful being here. Thank you so much, Matt, Jason, and Ben.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.